Hello, Petal. How you doing? How you feeling? How's it been in the last couple of days? Sorry I didn't get to record anything yesterday. It was just one of those days where there was a lot of appointments, a lot of errands, a lot of things to do. You know how it is and how it goes. But aside from all of that, how are you doing? How are things? Thank you for all the comments. It's so heartwarming to see them. It's just so lovely to read them, and I really do appreciate our little community and how everybody interacts with each other. It just brings such a smile to my face, and I do appreciate each and every one of you, and I'm glad that everybody's enjoying Faust so far. I am doing my best. Might not get it right all the time, but I am doing my best. It's been a long time since I've read it, and it's so good to see how many people it was their first read of Tom Holt, their first introduction to him. He's just such a legendary writer, and I think a lot of Gen Xers will say definitely the writer of our times. One of the greatest writers of our times, in my opinion, Pratchett, Will Self, is Irving Welsh. You know, these are the writers that I kind of like, as I more got into adulthood, you know, and I began to appreciate fiction that I was choosing to, you know, explore. These are titles that I really enjoyed. I don't know how I went off on that tangent there, just kind of like reminiscing. I'll be saying, when I were a lass back in the day. One of these times. Anyway, yes, so thank you for all the comments. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being yourselves. And I do appreciate each and every one of you for being here. And, you know, feel free. Please leave a comment, share, like, subscribe, whichever you'd like to do. But, you know, I'm just very grateful that you're here for Chapter 3 of Faust Among Equals. Let's do this thing. Not long afterwards, Lucky George started his reign of terror. That's overstating the case somewhat. More a series of brisk showers of extreme aggravation. Historians have, after exhaustive research, pinpointed what you might term the Sarajevo or Harper's Ferry of Lucky George's war against humanity. It was 6:30 on a Friday. The place, the centre of Amiens. The victim, a young insurance salesman whose name is not recorded. As a result, the annual wreaths are laid at the tomb of the unknown soldier, although soldier is probably pushing it a bit. The victim, hurrying to catch his bus, pauses for a moment outside a branch of the Credit Lyonnais. He fumbles in his wallet until he finds his cash dispenser cord. He inserts it, and he waits. After 5 seconds or so, which is a long time when you're standing out in the street, painfully conscious of the ebb and flow of the French provincial bus service passing you by, rather like the English one, the cash dispenser makes a noise. Par for the course, sure, but this isn't part of its usual repertoire. It burps. The victim frowns. He presses the button marked Cancel Transaction and waits. The lights flicker. The machine spells out a message. Your card has been retained, it says. Then it flickers again, or rather, eaten. The victim raises an eyebrow. Some last smear of the basic survival instincts sputtered across the back of his mind prompts him to take a step back. The lights dance. Rather salty, I thought. This time, the victim can actually smell the danger, but it's far too late. The machine is looking directly at him. In fact, it's smiling. And you can't have it back. So there. There is a fundamental and rather dangerous urge in all of us to try and cling to the jagged edge of normality, even when it's blindingly obvious that the longer you hold on, the further you're going to fall when your grip finally fails. The victim presses Cancel Transaction again. Bad move. Look, 4 eyes. The victim tries to back away, but the machine is doing a very good mongoose impression. It seems to have a direct line to the victim's feet. Nobody tries to cancel me and gets away with it. You got that? The victim's first thought is to apologise, but the dead hand of normality is gripping the scruff of his neck. You can't talk to these machines, he's thinking. They're just machines. They can't A stream of banknotes, glued together to form something disquietingly like a tongue, lashes out of the cash slot, flails horribly in the air, and lands on the victim's tie. Then it retracts. Two can play at that game. Buster. Just as the victim's nose is pressed up against the perspex screen, his chin flattened against the diagram showing the right way up, the tortured fibres of the tie give way, leaving the tongue wrapped around 3 inches of terylene, and the victim flat on his back in the gutter. But not for long. He scrambles to his feet. He runs. In his haste to get away, he fails to notice a patrolling gendarme and collides with him heavily. There's a short interlude while the gendarme brushes the insurance salesman off his lapels. Monsieur! There's a wildness in his eyes that commands attention, and fair enough. When a Frenchman is palpably more afraid of something that he's recently seen than a gendarme he's just knocked over, there's got to be something badly the matter. Monsieur, the bank just tried to kill me. It swallowed my card and then it ate my die. The gendarme has summed up the victim as mentally disturbed and is just about to render psychiatric first aid with his truncheon when he catches sight of the banknote tongue, still thrashing about, trying to feed 3 inches of tie in through the cash slot. He stares. The machine stares back. Then, and there's no other way to put this, it sticks its tongue out at the policeman. The gendarme stiffens. There are certain things you just don't do, no matter how many branches and wholly owned subsidiary companies you've got. It only takes him a fraction of a second to bark out the obligatory warning. The tongue extends further and waggles about. In fact, it connects with the gendarme's kepi, twists it round a couple of times, and stuffs it into the cash slot. There is another burp. A button lands on the pavement and rolls drunkenly away. The rest is most definitely not silence. Out comes the gendarme's 9mm service automatic. 3 cracks like the breaking of a giant's leg bones. The machine goes on grinning. It displays a derogatory message on its screen. All this is well known, of course. You'll find it in any history book in one version or another. What isn't so well recorded, probably because it's so very unnerving and mankind can only take so much reality before it starts demanding that something be done about it, is the fact that when the gendarme in question received his bank statement at the end of the month, he was disturbed to find an entry recording 3 rounds of 125 grain full metal jacket 9mm parabellum credited to his account on the day in question, with interest. And of course basic rate tax deducted at source. Shortly after the first report of this contretemps had reached the hot seat and were dismissed as being a rather offbeat practical joke, a fax machine in Toronto grabbed the secretary by the wrist as she was feeding paper into it, hurled her across the ionosphere, and dumped her down in Winnipeg, in the front office of a highly respected firm of water diviners. To make matters worse, it was a wrong number. Microwaves the length and breadth of Florida burst simultaneously into song until switched off. Now, narrator's note, as you know, I've been learning Norwegian, and all I can say is look up the word for microwave. Back to the story. Microwaves the lengths and breadths of Florida burst simultaneously into song until switched off, while a team of firemen in Tokyo fought for 2 hours to release a chat show host from the interior of a portable television set. When the unfortunate man was eventually freed, he was found to have broken several small bones in his wrists while hammering on the inside of the glass. In Novosibirsk, an entire warehouse full of retractable ballpoint pens was destroyed by a long-range artillery fire after turning into small but incredibly agile yellow snakes. The president of Venezuela appeared on national television to appeal for calm after all the office dictating machines in the country started answering back. Large parts of the centre of Perth were sealed off, leaving a handful of bemused Marines to watch the stately dance of the traffic lights over the sights of their machine guns. In London, all the telephones refused to speak to each other for 3 hours, but nobody noticed. Workers on a people's farm at an undisclosed location in Shantung province were frightened out of their wits when they reported for work only to find that the newly painted rice paddy had spontaneously landscaped itself into an 18-hole golf course complete with electric carts, clubhouse and conference facilities. Absolutely nothing peculiar happened in Ireland at all, which was perhaps the most disconcerting part of it. No statues of the Virgin Mary moved their arms or were seen to weep tears for a period calculated to have been in excess of 3 hours. In Paris, the Mona Lisa giggled. "Okay," said the finance director. "You win. We're withdrawing our agents." "And about time too," replied Lucky George. He fumbled in his pocket for a coin to feed the phone box, but could only find a small, bent washer. He smiled at it. "Just count yourselves extremely lucky. I'm a bit out of practice." "You won't get away with it, you know. You can hide, but you can't run." "Shouldn't that be the other?" "Think about it." Lucky George thought about it and decided he didn't like the finance director's tone, with the result that back in the hastily prepared emergency rooms at Pandemonium, the receiver gave the finance director's ear a big, wet kiss. The finance director wound his handkerchief around the earpiece and went on. "Tell you what we'll do, George. Give yourself up. Come quickly. We'll forget all about it. You can even have your old job back in the... We'll give you a nice, cushy job in the kitchens. Now I can't say fairer than..." The mouthpiece of the telephone popped an apple neatly into the finance director's mouth, and the line went dead. Lucky George hung up, smiled the phone booth back out of his existence, and crossed the road to a cafe where he ordered a beer and a toasted sandwich. Withdrawing all their agents? Like hell they were. He sat for a while and smoked, a process which in his case did not involve tobacco, and then reached for his glass, upended it on the table, and began a séance. In order to conjure the spirits of the dead, you need to link up at least 3 pairs of hands. Although he was alone, Lucky George didn't seem to find this a problem. "You there, Bill?" The saucer with Lucky George's unpaid bill in it rocked backwards and forwards a couple of times. Lucky George grinned and slipped a coin under the rim. "Oh, you thought it was the waiter who took it. Sorry to have disillusioned you." Whereupon a cloud of ectoplasm materialised above the table and hovered there, refracting light. A man in a bow tie and a black waistcoat hurried up and took his order of coffee and a slice of cheesecake. "How?" "Sheer bloody mindedness, mostly," replied Lucky George. "And you?" "Not so dusty," replied the shade of Sitting Bull. "They've recently transferred me to a job in administration." "Administration?" Lucky George raised an eyebrow. "Why was that, bully?" "Search me. The only reason I could come up with was that my name fitted. Like, you do a lot of sitting and..." "Quite so," Lucky George replied. "Anyway, to business. I seem to remember you owe me a favour, bully." The ectoplasm shook its head violently, causing a fortuitous rainbow. "Don't make me laugh. Your people stole our lands. They wiped out the buffalo. They raped our hunting grounds with the telegraph and the iron horse. They massacred us when we tried to fight and drove us into reservations. They destroyed our unique and vital cultural traditions and poisoned our youth with firewater and flame-grilled spicy bison burgers. I don't seem to recall owing any favours to anyone with skin that particularly revolting shade of pinky apricot." Lucky George frowned. "Short memory you've got, bully," he said. "I'm amazed you've forgotten who it was advised you to invest heavily in railroad bonds and Wells Fargo unsecured loan stock back in the early 1870s. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else." The ectoplasm quivered slightly, like a fluorescent jelly. "Point taken. All right. What do you want?" Lucky George paused while the waiter brought the coffee. They shared the cheesecake. "To tell you the truth, bully," said Lucky George, "I find myself in a bit of a fix." "You don't say." "Leave heavy irony to living, bully. They've got a flair for it. The point is, I need a spot of help from someone on the inside, on the other side, if you follow me. You want jam on it, you do." Do I? George replied mildly. He smiled at the remains of the cheesecake, rendering it inedible in under 2 centimetres of damson preserve. It's not a lot to ask, of course, if you want the entire Sioux Nation to find out about your career in bond washing.
All right, there's no need to get nasty. They've called off all their agents, just like they said.
George raised both eyebrows. You surprise me, Bully. You really do.
Freelancers, on the other hand, are not covered by the term agent. In contract law, as no doubt you recall, no contract of agency subsists in the case of a unilateral, open-ended contract, such as the offer of a public reward, until the contracting party signifies his acceptance of the offer by actually performing the contract. The leading authority on this point is the old case of Carlyle versus the Carbolic Smokeball Company, in which, I beg your pardon, I'm taking law at night school. No way I'm going to be just another dumb Injun all my life. I'm allergic to sun-dried buffalo and wampum gives me eczema.
Good for you, Bully. Any particular freelance you have in mind? The ectoplasm began to laugh, and laughed so violently that it shook its fragile manifestation out of existence and vanished, absent-mindedly taking the rest of the cheesecake with it. Lucky George sighed.
Oh, he said. Him. I might have guessed.
Ask any detective, and he'll tell you that getting the initial lead is the difficult part. Once you've got something, however slight, to go on, it's just a matter of inspired perseverance. The problem is getting that initial lucky break. Ask Kurt Lundqvist, and he'll tell you that the only way to get a break is to hit something hard. Or someone.
Now then,
he said, wrapping his belt around his fist.
We could do this the hard way,
or... He paused and reflected. Nah, why confuse the issue by introducing alternatives?
We'll do this the hard way,
he said. Possession of a warrant card valid in all jurisdictions, temporal as well as geographical, meant that it was no problem whatsoever for Lundqvist to nip backwards and forwards in time in the pursuit of his inquiries. This was a great help. For one thing, if a suspect sneakily died under interrogation, he could rewind back to the deceased's last lucid moment and start all over again.
I've never heard of him,
whimpered the interviewee.
Honest.
Listen. Lundqvist laid aside the belt and put an arm around the subject's shoulders.
Cooperate, why don't you? Do yourself a favour.
He paused and grinned.
I have to say that, you know. It's in the rules. Personally, the less you talk, the more I like it.
He picked up the belt again and waggled it meaningfully under the subject's nose.
Oh, but really,
the subject said,
I honestly have never heard that name in my life before. How can I have, for Christ's sake? He won't even be born for another 7 years.
Nostradamus paused and bit his lip.
Oh, shit,
he said.
Precisely, Lundqvist replied. Don't mind me, though. If you want to persist in fruitless denials for an hour or so, that's absolutely fine by me.
Nostradamus passed the tip of his tongue across his bone-dry lips.
All right, he said. All right. I admit I've heard of him. Doesn't mean to say I know where he is. I mean, I've heard of all sorts of people. I've heard of Elvis Presley. Doesn't follow that I know where he's hiding out.
Lundqvist raised an eyebrow.
Who's Elvis Presley?
He said. Nostradamus shrugged.
After your time, I suppose, he said. Or before. It gets a bit confusing sometimes.
Yes. Lundqvist smiled, or at least he drew back his lips to exhibit his teeth and clenched his fist around the belt.
You know, it's really nice of you to be so brave about this. Most guys just crack up and start talking the moment I've tied them to the chair.
Patted his knuckles against the palm of his other hand.
Say this for you, Nos. You've got balls. For now. Anyway.
Hold on. Nostradamus closed his eyes tightly, clenched his eyebrows together, and grimaced alarmingly.
Something's coming through right now.
There's a coincidence.
I can see.
The prophet began to rock the chair he was tied to backwards and forwards.
I can see a man.
Good start.
He's beating up this other man. He's got a belt around his knuckles. He's punching. Oh.
Lundqvist grinned sardonically.
Yes, the man's just broken his hand.
Nostradamus replied,
God, he's in real agony, the poor devil, rolling about on the floor. Hey, that really does hurt. If only I could see who it is, maybe I could walk.
He stopped. Lundqvist had taken hold of his ear and was trying to unscrew it.
Thanks for the tip, he said. Now try again.
Well, Lundqvist decided as he washed his hands, it was a start. It was something. He examined himself in the mirror and then stopped for a moment to remove a last splash of something nasty from his left cuff. A date in the late 20th century, some rather peculiar events, which could only be explained by reference to A, the supernatural, B, the considerably aggrieved, and C, the extremely childish. Could be, or was it just a coincidence? Not that Nostradamus was in fact the greatest seer the world had ever known, he reminded himself as he opened the door and walked out of the washroom. If he'd been any good at all, it was a safe bet that he'd have made bloody sure he spent Thursday, March the 16th, 1498, in a locked stone-walled room surrounded by armed guards. It had been a long time since Lundqvist had last been in Amsterdam, or almost. In fact, he'd been here the previous week, May the 9th to the 16th, 1995, but that was 7 years ago. He tried to remember if there were any warrants out for his arrest, or was that next month? Probably, he decided with a grin. That was after he'd done whatever he'd come here to do. Lucky George. George and Lundqvist went way back and forwards, of course. Not that he'd ever had a failure exactly. At the end of the day, he'd served the warrant, collected the subject and delivered him in accordance with the terms of the retainer. But even he had to admit that Lucky George hadn't come quietly. In fact, he'd come very noisily indeed, and nearly taken a substantial tranche of the fabric of reality with him. There had been moments, April 1563, for example, and December 1749, not to mention February 1255 and August 2014, when he'd been sure that the bastard was slipping through his fingers. Likewise, just as the thing any cop dreads most of all is having his own gun used against him, he particularly resented the way George had made him look a fool in the final showdown. Even bounty hunters have their feelings, and nobody likes being chased around the centre of a densely populated city by a 7-foot-tall scale replica of himself, brandishing an array of hopelessly anachronistic weapons and calling out for all to hear, "Look at me, I'm a pillock." And they'd let him escape. The idiots. Outside the airport, he found a telephone booth with a directory in it. He skimmed through it until he found what he was looking for. Troy. H.O. Relieved, he made a note of the address, fed the machine some money, and dialed the number. The lady in question was just then having a little bit of a problem at the port of Rotterdam. She'd got as far as to say, "I name this ship," and then tried. Buggery. Trying not to appear conspicuous, she glanced out of the corner of her eye at the big letters painted on the side. That wasn't much help. They called ships some pretty weird things these days, but even she had a feeling that passengers are not allowed beyond this point probably wasn't the damn thing's name. She'd have to mumble, "I named this ship," she therefore said, "and God bless all who sail in her." Then she smiled. That was okay. I needn't have worried, she told herself later, on her way home. The chances of anybody listening to what Miss World actually says are pretty minimal. In fact, it's reasonably safe to say that nobody takes any notice of Miss World at all, except in a fairly superficial way. Otherwise, how come she'd held the title 47 times under various assumed names and nobody had ever noticed? The number of people who look at her face is, after all, limited. The number who remember it, more limited still. Which was, she reflected, a pity for them. It was a nice face, besides having been extremely useful over the years to the shipbuilding industry. For the time being, home was a flat in one of the terribly old, terribly beautiful houses beside the Kaisergracht. It was hellishly expensive, and the stairs half killed her unless she took her heels off and walked up them in her stocking feet. But that's the price you have to pay for being sentimental. For it was this very room, in this very building, that she and George... She blushed. The building had been new then. In fact, not completely and 100% finished. No roof, for one thing. But they'd been young and in love, and it's nice to be able to lie in each other's arms and look up at the stars. They'd been on a day trip to the 17th century, and had been so wrapped up in each other, literally as well as figuratively, that they'd missed the last time warp home. Not that they'd minded terribly much about that. It had been, she remembered with a slight shudder, about 4 months before George's year ran out, and even then they both spent an awfully large proportion of the time not thinking about it. Having paid off her taxi, she let herself in, slipped off her shoes, and trotted up the stairs. As she reached the second-floor landing, she started to feel that faint prickling down the back of the neck that means either a premonition of terrible danger or too little fabric softener. Since she was wearing a backless dress, she decided it was probably danger. Unfortunately, she had a very bad attitude towards danger, mainly because when she was around, it tended to be something that happened to other people. Ninja silent in her shoelessness, she crept along the landing and pushed the door of her flat with the tip of one finger. It swung open. She swore. At first sight, it looked like the aftermath of a visit from an incredibly conscientious burglar. You know, one of those dreadfully pernickety perfectionist types who insist on knifing the cushions for concealed pearls and ransacking the shelves for hollowed-out books. Unless, however, he had also been an extraordinarily picky burglar, brought up on only the finest aristocratic country houses and the hunting lodges of minor royalty. It would only be reasonable to expect him to have taken something. And he hadn't. Or rather, he had, and that was something of a bitch, because it was the one thing she would really rather not have parted with, given that it was genuinely irreplaceable, a framed portrait, early 16th century. She made sure that the intruder had gone, and then sat down on all that was mortal of the bed and had a good swear. While she was doing this, and doing it ever so well, a thought struck her like a Mack truck, and she froze in mid-oath. If they'd come here just to steal his picture, why would they want to steal his picture? And who the hell were they anyway? From the epicentre of the mess, she extracted a suitcase, a few changes of clothing, and a big, heavy silver candlestick. Then she left the flat and caught a taxi. Yee! Ooh! Who stole the picture? What was the picture of? If you've already read the book, don't tell, because we know. But those who haven't read the book, it's all part of the story. It's okay. So Helen of Troy's come into the picture. So we got Lucky George, we've got Helen of Troy, and we've got our lovely Carl Lundqvist. Things are getting spicy. Things are getting spicy. Not in that way, just kind of like exciting and stuff. So my lovely beans, how are things? How are you going? Let me know how you are in the comments, please, if you would. If you could hit that notifications bell, the like button. If you want to share and subscribe, that's awesome. If you don't, that's cool. It's just good to have you here. I know I repeat this an awful lot, and I do apologise, but it's all part of the thing. It keeps the lights on. You know, these poor little hamsters, you've got to look out for them. They get tired. So, of course, if the hamsters can't keep the wheels turning and the lights on, then something else has got to, you know. Anywho, so hopefully we'll have another chapter tomorrow, all being well. I'm not sure about Friday. I've got a busy day on Friday. but we'll see how things go. And yes, any suggestions, any banter, just let me know how things are. Tell you what, and I know there's lots of people who appreciate this. If you would like to, if you've got this far, please tell me, and I'm going to regret this, your best dad joke of the day. I think that'll be quite fun, so we can all have a little giggle together, you know. And of course, always if you could like feedback with each other, and you know, it's just lovely to see. Anyway, I'm gonna start waffling, and the other feedback is the favourite tune of the outro is not quite the outro though, because I like we will mend it, we will fix it, we will stick it with scissors and glue. But there's bound to be lots more as well. Anywho, I'm off. Take care, take it easy, make sure to rest well when you can, keep warm, keep cool, keep hydrated, have good cups of tea or drink nice soup. I've been hearing about some good soup recipes as well. But yes, big love to you all, my lovely, lovely beans, and I will see you very soon with another chapter. Take it easy.